I used to be so scared of getting feedback on my writing, and now that it is the first time that I've gotten feedback on a book that I've written, it's actually kind of awesome. This first book that I've been writing is the first book that I've ever finished, like all the way through, that I've finished a first draft of, I've edited, I'm planning to publish. It is my first like real book. I haven't had people read my writing since I was a very little kid or my English teachers. And that is very different kind of styles of writing. I never really was planning on publishing it or pursuing it seriously. So now that I've been telling everyone that I'm going to be an author and I'm going to publish books, it would have been really awkward if I finally showed them my work and they all were like, oh, I don't know, like, or they look at it and they're like, wow, like, you're just not good at writing. And I think that these are very real, like, very real fears, and they're very possible. But I think it comes to a point where, like, if you spend so much time on a writing and you're so passionate about it, there's no way that it can be like that bad. For a long time, I only knew about beta readers and like editors. I didn't know that there was like all these other options. And I decided to do alpha readers first with my book because I kind of wanted a test round of like beta reading because it was still like too rough of a draft where I wasn't confident giving it to complete strangers. So I chose three alpha readers for people that are close in my life. And I wanted them to read it and give me honest feedback. I'd rather have them be the ones to tell me, like, I'm not a good writer than the people that are on the internet and strangers that I don't know, it's just more of a comfort. I made three separate documents because as someone who is like a psych person, other people's opinions can very much influence your own, especially when you are editing something for the first time. I didn't want like someone's opinions to influence someone else's opinions on the story. So I gave three separate Google documents and I made them for each person. And then so when they're commenting and reading, they're not being influenced by all the other comments that have been made by people before, because I wanted to keep it like a separated study to see like if I'm going to get things that people pick up on the same way or things that are different. I was editing my book at the same time as getting feedback. So I was sending like a chapter at a time into this document and compiling it out of Scrivener and then putting it in this document. And then I was doing it as I go because I realized that if I waited completely until I had all the story and then I gave it to them, I think it would have taken longer to get feedback. And I wanted to give them time to like start reading it while I was going. And getting feedback as I was editing it was actually very helpful. I won't do this with beta readers because I want to give them a shorter time frame, and that's going to be a bit more professional. But with alpha readers, I was totally comfortable with just like giving them a chapter at a time and then seeing how it goes. The very beginning, when I first sent my book out, I was terrified. It's so scary because I wasn't even worried about them like not liking the story. I just was worried that they were going to read my writing and cringe or think that I was just innately a bad writer. And I think you can have like an idea of your skill level based on other books that you've read, but until you have that outside like confirmation that you have some talent, it's really hard to knock it in your head and be like, am I just like in my own head? Am I delusional? Like, do I think I'm this talented writer and really am not? And most of the time it's kind of a combination of you probably have a good amount of talent, that's why you're passionate, and you probably still have a lot of room to grow. But I would say most writers are heavily critical of their work in comparison to how other people see their work. So that was also something that was really helpful for me, where I knew that I was going to be way more critical of this story than anyone else. So whenever I got criticism, I was like, well, I'm 10 times more critical. So it can't be as bad as how I am to myself. So I've been using Google Forms to get information on their feedback as they go. And I've also had them been commenting in their document. Everyone is going to see the story in their own way, where these people aren't necessarily like target audiences for this book. They're just people that are close to me in my life and that were amazing enough to want to read it. I have my computer right here. What I wanted to do is go through and kind of react to feedback on camera. I wanted to kind of show you my thoughts as I'm going through feedback. So currently, two of my alpha readers have completely finished my novel, and one of them is actively working on it, so they should be done soon. But almost all of them have given me forms and comments so far, so I'm probably going to make this a little series of me kind of reacting to feedback, implementing feedback, just the whole process of getting criticism on your book, because this was a part that I was really in the dark on when I first started writing. So, because I didn't have a lot of writing friends, I didn't have writing workshops or critique groups. So, I didn't really know like how this process worked. It's been definitely a learning process. There's a bit of a learning curve, but I'm really excited. So, what I'm first going to do is I'm going to look at the form that I did for that and look at the responses and then notice any patterns. And then I'm going to look at the actual document and see if they left any comments. I know I was kind of like, guys, come on, please finish reading it. So they didn't really leave a lot of comments towards the end, but that's okay because I also had a full on drawn out conversation with two of my alpha readers that have finished it so far and I've taken notes. So I kind of want to go over that too because I want to share what it's like and what I was feeling and how everything kind of worked and any advice I'd give for your trying to get feedback for the first time. It's very daunting, but it's also so rewarding and it makes the writing feel more real because the more people that you can share your story with, the more real it feels. I'm going to go to my Google Docs because I'm getting kind of nervous, like just going into like my Google Docs and opening these up. I want to figure out a way to make reading a manuscript more accessible because Google Docs is kind of hard sometimes, and I should have put in like a sidebar menu to organize it, but I didn't. I had a pre-reading information form, so I put a link in the Google Docs, and I'm opening it right now. Okay. I literally untitled it. Okay, so I put a little, like, I don't know if you can even tell, I put a little Google form in the very beginning. And this is just kind of like to give some details about my story and everything before I go into it. I basically said, like, congratulations, you've been selected to be the first eyes for the future best-selling book. Of course. Here are some things to know beforehand. So I talk about the genre. This is a YA fantasy romance genre. It's currently 85,000 words. It ended at 97,000 words. So I did make this while I was editing it. I will share a few chapters at a time every few days, and you can read at your own pace. Don't worry about details like grammar and spelling. Focus more on the story overall. So at this point, I'm looking for more developmental advice, comments on character, plot, development, and pacing, things you like, things you don't like. The copy editing and the proofreading can be saved for later because I probably will end up editing a lot as I go. And then I said, feel free to add comments as you go, but no need to force it. Um, Sometimes I feel when I'm editing or giving feedback, I feel like I have to give comments sometimes to look like I'm giving feedback, but sometimes they're not needed necessarily. If everything's flowing well and you're kind of immersed in the story, there's no need to kind of make up a comment if you don't need it. Please be honest. Say when you're confused, say when you feel less engaged, give any ideas that could help. I think it's good to be honest, but in a polite and respectful way. So if you're like, oh, this is confusing, you can say that. But instead of saying like, oh, this sucks, like that's just kind of rude. Thank you so much for helping me with this book. Right now I'm going through Alpha Reader 1, so 1, 2, and 3. So Alpha Reader 1, I'm going to go through their line level comments. And then every time I get to a forum, I'm going to look at that and then look at all of the responses together. Okay, so this person says that they really like the opening line. I think the opening line is really important to like draw the reader and like kind of set the stage for the story. I do think I'm going to change it because the first chapter is usually the most changed when you're editing. One of my alpha readers thought that the way I described the mother and the dad, the way the names that I gave them, like didn't match the time period. And I'm like, possibly. I think with naming, I'm really bad at coming up with stuff like that because I see it as kind of annoying. So I usually go back and edit it later. This is really good. Some of the feedback that I got from my alpha readers is that they really loved my descriptions and they felt like they could really see what was happening and it felt like the book was a movie. And I'm so grateful that they think that because in one of my Google forms, I kept asking, like, how well can you picture this? Because I find that I really like really descriptive and really immersive, like sensory details in writing because I need that to be pulled into the story. And sometimes I have that issue when I'm reading where it's not descriptive enough. And that's kind of more my style. I really like that, like really descriptive, immersive details, especially because when I'm writing fantasy, I want to be like immersed in that world. And to hear that multiple people said that they liked the descriptions was really helpful because I can picture it in my head, but I really hope other people can also picture it because we're all going to interpret it differently. A lot of edits and feedback that I've been seeing, and also when I do for other people, is asking a lot of questions. Like when you're reading and something is confusing, just ask questions because sometimes the questions are intentional, where you're not supposed to know this at this time, but other times the confusion is not intentional and that can confuse the reader more. So I think there's that like fine balance of like asking the right questions at the right time and knowing the right answers. Another big part of feedback that I got from these alpha readers is that my first chapter kind of drags a bit. I think there's that problem with fantasy where the first chapter is like so hard because you want to balance introducing the person to the world, but you also don't want to info dump. So it's a really fragile balance of giving enough information where you can understand what's going on, but not giving too much information where it confuses you. So I feel like there's that constant balance. And sometimes I tend to under explain things because I think I want to show things, I don't want to tell. But then there are times where sometimes you just have to give a sentence or two of just telling to explain something in your world and then move on. That's something I want to focus on when I'm implementing feedback is just putting that back into the story and making sure that it's like even and understandable. So what's really cool about this is people will like tell me like, wow, this is great foreshadowing, or wow, this means this is amazing symbolism. And sometimes it's accidental where I'll read it back and I'll be like, oh, I didn't even notice that was foreshadowing, but that fits so well. So I think it's a fun thing when people pick up on things that I don't even pick up on. Each person you get feedback from is going to have like an area of like expertise that they know a lot about, so they're going to give you great feedback in like that specific lens. Love this imagery. Awesome. Thank you. Good foreshadowing. I want to know what the deal is here because it seems a little shady and forbidden. It's really helpful when reading back feedback when readers pick up on foreshadowing because it means that you're feeding enough to them where they're kind of picking up on it. It's that balance that I'm trying to understand as a writer where it's like you want to feed the reader enough information where they're intrigued and they kind of have an idea of where it's going, but you don't want it to make it so obvious that it's like so obvious that you're feeding the reader everything, because finding that balance of like giving the reader enough but then trusting that they know what to do with it, that's kind of hard. Like I'm still trying to perfect that. I like the suspenseful plot twist. I wanted to give a check-in right after chapter 1 and 2 because those are really important to like setting up the story, and I think it's good for like first impressions as well. This is the first time I've actually read this because it's been months and months that I've had this feedback out there, but I haven't looked at it. I'm trying to figure out this form thing because I can't really tell who this is, but based on the responses, I'm pretty sure I know which reader this is. So I'm going through, okay, this is my post chapter 1 and 2 check in, and I have 3 responses. So I'm going to go through and kind of talk about it because I'm excited, but I'm kind of nervous. I've been talking about it, but I haven't seen the written responses. So we'll see. I have my computer right here. It's kind of hard to see because my phone is stacked on books right now. I don't have a fancy tripod. Not yet. And then I have this notebook, and I'm going to talk about patterns that I see in feedback. Feedback patterns. What are your initial thoughts? This is person 1. Your word choice and rhythm flow really well, and it feels like a song in my head. I really like when reading is rhythmic, like it feels like it flows. Um, and I'm glad that they picked up on that because I think that's more of my style. I can also create a mind movie really easily, not too descriptive so it's distracting from the plot, just enough to pull me into the story. Most importantly, I really like your main character already. What's amazing about this is good description. She likes the characters. I'm only going to write down like negative feedback or stuff that I want to change. How well could you visualize the world, setting, characters? This person rated 10 out of 10, which is amazing because I was worried about that because I picture it really well, but I couldn't tell if like it was just me or something else. How real do the characters feel? How do they think, speak, etc.? 9 out of 10. That's really good because I was worried about my character voice. I don't want them to feel the same. I want them to feel different. And that's something that I think like amateur writers have a problem with, especially like that's why I thought I had a problem with it because I'm new to writing. So just thinking about like making characters feel distinct is like hard, but it's so amazing when you get it right. What was your least favorite part? Were there any moments that you felt less engaged? They seem emotionally unavailable so far, but I think that might be by design. The women have more dimension to them here. I kept getting feedback that the men in my story, at least in the very beginning, were less like dimensional and they were a bit more flat. And the women in my story were a lot more like complex and like drawn out. And I think a lot of that is just from personal experience where I can relate to women more and I understand their perspective and how they think. So I think I kind of like that was a bias, unconscious thing. But I am really excited because there are some very important male characters in my story, and I want to make sure that they get the arc that they deserve. Because at this point, they also haven't met the male main character, which is, I think is probably the most interesting character of the whole story. But yes, like some of like for example, like the father or like some random characters that are kind of more sad characters, even if they're a sad character, I still want to give them like human qualities and like something to root for. Do you have any predictions for the story? I love when predictions are accurate. It just feels so exciting when someone's reading your book and they have an accurate prediction because you're hinting a promise to the reader. So it's good for them to have a general idea of where the story's going, but then also having those plot twists and like those information drops is just as important. Any additional thoughts? Keep writing. I like it a lot so far. Oh, that's really exciting. So this alpha reader had really positive feedback. I know like these people are like close people in my life, so obviously it's going to be a bit biased, but I'm very happy that they like it. So we're going on to alpha reader 2. Okay, so what are your initial thoughts? I like how these two chapters laid the foundation. I'm not the biggest fan of fantasy where you have to adjust to a new world, but you did a good job providing context. They visualized the story at a 10 out of 10. How real do the characters feel? A 9 out of 10. So, same exact feedback as the first person. So, this is really interesting where I noticed patterns. Were there any moments that felt too dragged on? Not really. That's good. Short feedback is always good feedback. So, this person's favorite part is the plot twist at the end of chapter 2 hinting kind of the catalyst, which is good that that's their favorite part because it's supposed to be important. This person also had an accurate prediction, which is good because I want to set my readers up for things that happen later, but I also like want to give enough question. Here's the third alpha reader. Initial thoughts. I liked the world building in these first few chapters. Can't wait to learn more. Okay, so this one, visualize your world setting stories. I can picture it vividly, 9 out of 10. I appreciate that. How real did the characters feel? 7 out of 10. This is more where I would put it. I think this alpha reader is a bit more critical, and I can understand that because I feel like something that I'm going to focus on more is the characters and how real they feel because they really drive the story. And I think my world itself feels pretty real, which is amazing because it is fantasy. What was your favorite part? I really liked some of the phrasing ways things are described, which is more of a line level thing, but it's really nice to hear those things because when you're getting like a lot of feedback, when someone at least really likes the way that you word things or the way you write or your writing style, that stuff is really confirming for someone who's like a new writer because I think we're all a little scared that our writing is like cringy or clunky or really bad or like doesn't make sense. And a story, like story aspects, I can change, I can work on. Like if the plot's not working, if the characters aren't working, I can work on that. I learned about this in my editing course. I have a lot more passive active beats in the very beginning, which I think in the beginning should be a lot more like active action. I think I have a lot more generic action beats, like a lot of talking and getting ready, and I can see how that could be a bit like dragged on. Okay, so I got through the first 3 responses to post chapter 1 and 2 check in, which is really exciting. The biggest takeaways I can get from the first few chapters, especially talking out loud with these people, is that it needs to kind of hook the reader in a bit more in the very beginning. People do like the twist, people like the world in the world building, but adding a bit more context would be helpful. And the characters. There's one character that every alpha reader has come to me specifically and been like, there's something off about that character. There's something that doesn't work. They either hate them, they are confused by them, they think they're flat. And they're supposed to not be a very likable character, but even characters are supposed to be unlikable. You should still like reading about them. So like even I had some advice that like even I had some feedback that even reading about this character was just so hard to read, and I think I might have gone too far where I wanted to make all my characters feel distinct and different. And I wanted this character to be unlikable because I didn't want them to fall into this, oh, they're a likable, morally gray character. I really wanted him to be unlikable. And I think I went too far. So that's the feedback that is really helpful where people catch me on like, I see what you're doing there, but it was like too much. Like we gotta give him a little bit more. We gotta give him more development. So I'm like, okay, good to know. It's very helpful feedback. I definitely want to continue recording myself going through this feedback because it also helped me look back and see like my process and how everything worked out. The right sort of feedback gets you excited to write again, and it gets you excited to go back into revisions. And I think that's like something that I've learned through doing this whole feedback thing where like I'm also giving feedback to other people's work and I'm getting feedback on my own. So realizing that at the end of the day, like your feedback should motivate the writer to improve their story. It shouldn't like hurt their confidence, and like you can't really control like how someone's going to feel, but like it shouldn't be like making the writer think they can't write. Like that's not what it's about. It's about like trying to make the story the best it can be and giving like suggestions for how they can do that. And whenever someone shows me something that I haven't seen before, I see it as like awesome because I'm like, wow, now I can make my story better. And I think removing myself from the story itself, where I'm the author, but this story is a different entity where it's not me. So when people are criticizing it, they're not criticizing me directly, they're criticizing the story because I look at the story and I see so many things that I want to change. But I don't take that personally necessarily. I'm like, okay, this is a story and I want to make it better. And then when I start implementing feedback, I want to talk about like what stuff I'm going to implement and what stuff I'm going to kind of not focus on because you don't have to take every single piece of feedback because a lot of this is kind of like intuition, you know, how you perceive what is meant for your story and what isn't. Where there's certain feedback that I get that I'm like, yes, like I need to use that. Like that is needed. And there's other stuff that I get that I'm like, oh, I can see why they think that because of their experience, but it might not work for the story. Being able to decipher what is meant for your story and what is not, and it's really exciting because at the end of the day, like it's your story. So you get to make the final call on stuff, at least for self publishing. That's why I'm self publishing. Yeah, so thanks for watching and happy writing.